On a bitter cold evening, CEO and single mother Rosalind Harrington walked her 8-year-old son toward the upscale restaurant where they always dined. Her heels clicking sharp against wet pavement. Her phone pressed to her ear, her attention anywhere but on the small boy trailing behind her. But just a few steps ahead, a man in a worn jacket was crouching in the rain, shielding an elderly stranger who could barely stand. He pulled off his own coat and draped it over the old man's trembling shoulders. Leo watched the scene with wide, unblinking eyes, and for the first time in years, something inside Rosalind cracked. If one small act of kindness could change the fate of 3 broken souls, what awaited them on the other side of that rain-soaked night? Rosalind Harrington was 37 years old, with golden blonde hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders and a figure that belonged on magazine covers. She stood tall, elegant, and untouchable, her presence commanding every room she entered. But her beauty was cold, almost clinical. Her eyes, a striking shade of pale blue, rarely softened. Colleagues described them as mirrors in a boardroom, reflective, piercing, and impossible to read. She was the CEO of Harrington Dynamics, one of the most powerful data technology firms on the East Coast. Her schedule began at 6 in the morning and rarely ended before midnight. Every decision she made rippled through thousands of employees, millions of dollars' entire markets. She wore designer suits like armor and spoke in short, clipped sentences that left no room for argument. 5 years ago, her marriage to Owen Milton had collapsed. He had been charming once until Rosalind discovered he had been sleeping with his new assistant for nearly a year. The betrayal shattered something deep inside her. She filed for divorce within the week and never looked back. But in the aftermath, she built walls so high and so thick that not even her own son could climb them. Leo was all she had left, and yet she barely knew him. At 8 years old, Leo Harrington was small for his age, with soft brown hair that fell across his forehead and dark, thoughtful eyes that carried a sadness far beyond his years. He loved to draw. His sketchbook went everywhere with him, filled with pictures of families laughing together, strangers helping strangers, scenes of warmth and kindness that he rarely witnessed in his own life. He adored his mother, but loving her felt like reaching for someone standing on the other side of a glass wall. She was always busy, always distracted, always looking at her phone instead of at him. Their dinners together were silent affairs, Rosalind answering emails, while Leo pushed food around his plate, wondering if she even remembered he was there. He had no close friends. They moved too often, following Rosalind's career from city to city. Each new school meant starting over, and Leo had long since stopped trying. Instead, he poured his loneliness onto paper, drawing the life he wished he had. Across town, in a small apartment with peeling paint and radiators that barely worked, lived Clinton Reeves. At 36, Clinton was broad-shouldered and strong with calloused hands that spoke of years of hard labor. His face was weathered but kind, with warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He had worked as an industrial equipment technician for a small local company until budget cuts forced him out. Now he patched together a living however he could, delivering packages, waiting tables on weekend nights, fixing machines for anyone who would pay. 3 years ago, his wife had passed away from a chronic lung disease. She had fought bravely, but in the end the illness had been stronger. Clinton had held her hand until her final breath, and when she was gone, he had gathered the broken pieces of his heart and focused everything on their daughter. Bridget was 7 years old with enormous brown eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. But she was fragile. She had inherited her mother's weak lungs, and severe asthma kept her home from school more days than not. Her tiny body would seize with coughing fits that left Clinton terrified, clutching her inhaler like a lifeline. Despite everything, Bridget never complained. She understood in the way that only children who have suffered understand that her father was doing his best. She tried to be strong for him even when she could barely breathe. Clinton lived by a simple philosophy. Kindness cost nothing. and no matter how hard life became, he refused to let it harden his heart. He believed that the measure of a person wasn't found in their bank account or their job title, but in how they treated the people who could do nothing for them in return. His neighbors knew him as the man who shoveled snow from elderly porches without being asked, who fixed broken appliances for single mothers who couldn't afford repairs, who always had a kind word for anyone who looked like they needed one. In a world that often rewarded selfishness, Clinton Reeves remained stubbornly, quietly good. These four souls, Rosalind frozen behind her walls of success, Leo starving for his mother's attention, Clinton holding his family together with love and little else, and Bridget fighting for every breath, were about to collide on a rainy night that would change everything. The rain came without warning. One moment the sky was merely gray. The next, sheets of water poured down, drumming against car roofs and turning the sidewalk into a river. Rosalind quickened her pace heels, splashing through puddles as she checked her watch. Their reservation was in 5 minutes, and she despised being late. Behind her, Leo clutched his sketchbook to his chest, trying to shield it from the rain. He had learned long ago not to ask his mother to slow down. The wind gusted hard, slapping rain against Rosalind's designer coat. She grimaced, already mentally composing a sharp message to her assistant about arranging better transportation. She barely noticed the commotion ahead until Leo tugged at her sleeve. A man was crouched on the sidewalk, arms wrapped protectively around an elderly stranger who was shaking violently, his white hair plastered to his skull. The old man's legs had given out, and he was barely conscious, slumped against a lamppost. The younger man, Clinton, spoke in calm, steady tones. "It's okay, sir. I've got you. Help is coming." Without hesitation, Clinton stripped off his jacket, a worn thing frayed at the cuffs, and wrapped it around the old man's shoulders. Rain soaked through Clinton's shirt immediately, but he didn't flinch. With one hand supporting the stranger and the other holding his phone, he dialed for an ambulance. Leo stopped walking. His eyes went wide, fixed on the scene, as if it were something sacred. "Mom," he whispered, tugging harder on Rosalind's sleeve. "Mom, look. That man is helping him." Rosalind paused, irritation flickering across her face. She was about to tell Leo to keep moving when something made her really look at what was happening in front of her. The man in the rain wasn't performing for anyone. There were no cameras, no audience. He was simply helping because someone needed help. His clothes were soaked. He was shivering, and yet his voice remained gentle, his hands steady, his entire focus on the stranger in his arms. Something stirred in Rosalind's chest, a sensation so unfamiliar that she almost didn't recognize it. It felt like a crack forming in ice that had been frozen solid for years. Leo's small voice broke through the sound of the rain. "He gave away his coat, Mom. He's cold now, but he doesn't care." Rosalind didn't answer. She couldn't. She stood frozen on that rain-soaked sidewalk, watching a stranger sacrifice his own comfort for someone he had never met. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than numbness. Clinton managed to help the elderly man to his feet just as the ambulance lights appeared in the distance. But the old man was still unsteady, still shaking, and Clinton knew he needed to get him somewhere dry. The nearest shelter was the awning of the restaurant, the same upscale establishment where Rosalind had her reservation. Clinton guided the old man carefully, one arm around his frail shoulders, speaking softly the whole way. "Just a few more steps, sir. We'll get you warm." They had barely reached the entrance when a security guard stepped forward, his face twisted with disdain. "Sir, you can't bring him here. You're dripping water everywhere. Our guests won't appreciate this." Clinton's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "He collapsed in the street. He needs to sit down until the ambulance arrives." The guard crossed his arms. "That's not our problem. Move along." Without a word, Clinton lowered the old man onto a dry corner near the door and knelt beside him. He pulled napkins from his pocket, ones he had grabbed from a food cart earlier, and began dabbing at the old man's face. Leo watched from a few feet away, his small fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't right. This wasn't fair. Before Rosalind could stop him, Leo darted forward. He pulled tissues from his own pocket and crouched beside Clinton, helping to dry the old man's trembling hands. Clinton looked up surprised. A small boy in expensive clothes with kind eyes and gentle hands. He smiled a warm, genuine smile that seemed to push back the cold. "Thank you," Clinton said softly. "That's very kind of you." Leo's cheeks flushed. No one ever called him kind. No one ever noticed him at all. Rosalind stood frozen near the entrance, watching her son kneel in a puddle to help a stranger. A war raged inside her, the instinct to maintain her image, to stay detached, to be the cold, untouchable CEO everyone expected. But another part of her, buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed, wanted to join them. The guard stepped forward again, his voice sharp. "Ma'am, your table is ready. I suggest you collect your son." Leo looked up at his mother, his eyes pleading. "Mom, why are they being mean to him? He was helping." The question hit Rosalind like a blow to the chest. She opened her mouth to respond, to explain, to rationalize, to do what she always did, but no words came, because the truth was simple and devastating. She had no answer. And in that moment she realized that somewhere along the way she had stopped teaching her son what truly mattered. The ambulance arrived moments later, and paramedics took over the care of the elderly man. Clinton stepped back, soaked to the bone, but visibly relieved. He thanked the paramedics, exchanged a few quiet words with them, and then turned to find somewhere warm for himself and his daughter. Bridget had been waiting nearby, huddled under a small overhang, her thin jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. She ran to her father the moment he approached, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Daddy, you're all wet," she said, her voice small and worried. Clinton smiled down at her, brushing rain from her hair. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Let's get inside somewhere warm, okay?" The restaurant was their only option. Clinton knew they didn't belong there. The prices on the menu in the window made that painfully clear, but Bridget was shivering, and he needed to get her out of the cold. They found a small table near the door, far from the elegant dining room where Rosalind and Leo were seated. Clinton ordered hot water and asked for nothing else, explaining quietly to the server that they just needed a moment to warm up. The server's expression made it clear what she thought of them. Across the room, Rosalind sat in the private VIP section, bathed in warm golden light. Crystal glasses gleamed. Silver cutlery sparkled. Everything around her whispered of success and wealth and power, but she couldn't focus. Her eyes kept drifting to the small table by the door where the man from the rain sat with a little girl who looked pale and fragile. The girl had started coughing, a wet, rattling sound that carried across the quiet restaurant. Clinton rubbed his daughter's back, his face tight with concern. "Breathe slowly, Bridget, nice and easy." He flagged down the server and asked for warm water. Just warm water, nothing else. The server hesitated, glanced at the manager, and then walked away without responding. Leo had turned completely around in his chair, watching the scene with worried eyes. "Mom, that little girl is sick. Why isn't anyone helping her?" Rosalind felt her chest tighten. She wanted to look away, to return to her emails, to pretend this wasn't happening. But Leo was watching her now, waiting for her to do something, and that little girl's cough was getting worse. Without fully understanding why, Rosalind picked up her phone and began typing a message to her private physician just in case. At the table across the room, Leo had opened his sketchbook. His pencil moved quickly across the page, capturing the scene from the rain, a man giving away his coat, an old man being held upright, kindness in the middle of a storm. When he finished, he stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then he looked at his mother, at her designer dress and her expensive jewelry, and her face that never smiled, and he wondered if she had ever done anything like that in her entire life. The question made his heart hurt in ways he couldn't name. He wondered if his mother had ever knelt in the rain for anyone. He wondered if she even knew how. Bridget's coughing grew worse. What had started as a rattling in her chest became a desperate struggle for air. Her small body curled forward, her hands clutching the table edge as she fought to breathe. Clinton was on his feet instantly, one hand on her back, the other searching frantically through her bag. The inhaler was empty. His blood ran cold. He had meant to refill the prescription yesterday, but the pharmacy had been closed and he had been working a double shift, and now his daughter couldn't breathe. "Help!" he called out, his voice breaking. "Please, someone help! My daughter, she has asthma." The server glanced over, then looked away. The manager took a step back toward the kitchen. Other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one moved. No one except Leo. The boy shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mom!" His voice rang through the restaurant, high and desperate. "Mom, please! You have to help them!" Rosalind looked up from her phone. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Old instincts told her to stay seated, to let someone else handle it to protect her image. But her son was staring at her with tears in his eyes, and across the room a little girl was suffocating. Something inside Rosalind shattered. She rose from her chair and strode across the restaurant, her heels clicking with purpose. She pulled out her phone and dialed her private physician without hesitation. "Dr. Callahan, I need you at Meridian Restaurant immediately. A child is having a severe asthma attack. Bring everything." She ended the call and crossed to Clinton's table. Without a word, she shrugged off her cashmere coat, a coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and wrapped it around Bridget's trembling shoulders. "Help is coming," she said, her voice steady. "The doctor will be here in minutes." Clinton looked up at her, shock and gratitude warring on his face. "I thank you. I don't know how to." "Don't," Rosalind said quietly. "Just focus on your daughter." Leo appeared at his mother's side, his small hand slipping into hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. For the first time in 5 years, Rosalind Harrington had done something that had nothing to do with power or profit or image. She had simply helped someone who needed help, and it felt like breaking through the surface of frozen water, painful and terrifying and alive. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and medical equipment. Clinton held Bridget's hand the entire way, murmuring reassurances while the paramedics worked to stabilize her breathing. Rosalind followed in her car with Leo buckled in the back seat. She didn't question why she was doing this. She didn't analyze it. She simply drove. At the hospital, Bridget was rushed into the emergency room. Clinton stood in the hallway, soaked and shaking, watching the doors swing closed behind his daughter. He had never felt so helpless in his life. An hour passed, then 2. Rosalind stayed, though she couldn't explain why. She sat in the waiting room with Leo, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, a small warm weight that she had forgotten the comfort of. When the doctor finally emerged to say that Bridget was stable, Clinton's legs nearly gave out. He slumped against the wall, covering his face with his hands, and for the first time since his wife's death, he allowed himself to cry. Rosalind watched him for a long moment. Then she walked to the vending machine, bought 2 cups of coffee, and brought one to him. "She's going to be okay," she said, her voice softer than she had intended. Clinton took the coffee with trembling hands. "Thank you for everything. You didn't have to." "I know." They sat together in the quiet hallway, 2 strangers connected by a storm. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Clinton said eventually, staring at the floor. "Lung disease. Bridget inherited her condition. Every time she can't breathe, I see." He stopped, unable to finish. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprising herself, she spoke. "My husband betrayed me 5 years ago. I found out he had been cheating with his assistant for almost a year." She paused, the old wound aching. "I think I stopped trusting anyone after that. Stopped feeling. It was easier to be cold than to risk getting hurt again." Clinton looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see the CEO or the designer clothes or the icy reputation. He saw a woman who had been wounded so deeply that she had forgotten how to love. "Being cold keeps you safe," he said quietly, "but it also keeps you alone." The words struck Rosalind with unexpected force. She thought of all the nights in her empty penthouse, all the dinners with Leo where she never looked up from her phone, all the moments she had missed because she was too afraid to feel. Across the room, Leo stirred. He blinked awake and looked around until he found Bridget through the window of her room, small and pale but breathing steadily. He pulled out his sketchbook and began to draw. When he finished, he walked over to his mother and held up the picture. It showed 4 people standing together, a man, a woman, and 2 children. Underneath, in careful letters, Leo had written one word: family. Rosalind stared at the drawing for a long, long time. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. She had spent years building an empire, commanding boardrooms, closing deals worth millions of dollars. But she had never, not once, been included in a child's drawing of family. The simple picture drawn with crayons on hospital paper meant more to her than any contract she had ever signed. The photograph appeared online the next morning. Someone at the hospital had recognized Rosalind and snapped a picture of her sitting beside Clinton in the waiting room, her designer coat wrapped around a child who was clearly not her own. The headline was ruthless. By noon, the story had spread across every business news outlet. Rosalind's phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from board members demanding explanations. The company's stock dipped by 3%. That afternoon, she faced an emergency meeting with Harrington Dynamics' board of directors. "This is a disaster." The chairman said, his voice cold. "You were photographed in a hospital with some unknown man and his sick child. The optics are terrible. Investors are nervous." Rosalind sat at the head of the table, her face expressionless. "I helped a child who was having a medical emergency. I fail to see how that reflects poorly on the company." "It reflects poorly because you looked vulnerable," another board member snapped. "Emotional, unprofessional." The words cut deeper than Rosalind expected. Vulnerable, emotional. The very things she had spent 5 years trying to eliminate from her life. That evening, she returned home to find Leo sitting at the kitchen table waiting for her. "Mom, can we see Bridget tomorrow? I want to bring her my drawing." Rosalind hesitated. The board's warnings echoed in her mind. The stock price, the optics, the carefully constructed image she had spent years building. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, her voice flat. Leo's face crumbled. "But they're our friends now," Clinton said. "They're not our friends, Leo." The words came out harsher than she intended. "They're strangers. What happened last night was a one-time thing. We need to move on." She saw the hurt flash across her son's face, saw the way his shoulders slumped, saw the light in his eyes dim. And still she couldn't take the words back. That night, Clinton received no message from Rosalind. No call, no explanation, just silence. He sat by Bridget's hospital bed holding her small hand and told himself it was for the best. Women like Rosalind Harrington didn't belong in his world. He had been foolish to think otherwise. But the memory of her eyes in that waiting room, the crack in her armor, the glimpse of warmth beneath the ice stayed with him long after he turned out the lights. Leo disappeared on a Wednesday. Rosalind came home from work to find his room empty, his bed made, and a single piece of paper on his pillow. The note was written in careful, shaky handwriting. "Mom, I know you're scared, but Clinton is good. Bridget is good. They're not going to hurt us. Please don't push them away. I love you." For 3 seconds, Rosalind couldn't breathe. Then panic exploded through her chest. She called the police. She called her security team. She called everyone she could think of, her voice cracking her composure, shattering like glass. Her son was gone. Her son, who she had neglected and ignored and taken for granted, Her son, who had only ever wanted her to see him, was gone. She searched for hours. Every street, every park, every place Leo had ever mentioned. The rain started again, turning the city into a gray, weeping blur. It was Clinton who found him. Leo was huddled under the awning of a bus stop 3 blocks from the hospital where Bridget was still recovering. He was soaking wet, shivering, clutching his sketchbook like a lifeline. Clinton crouched beside him, his heart breaking at the sight. "Hey, buddy, your mom is looking for you. She's really scared." Leo looked up, his eyes red from crying. "I didn't want to run away forever. I wanted her to understand. She's not bad, you know. She's just scared. Like Bridget gets scared when she can't breathe." Clinton sat down on the wet bench, letting the rain soak through his clothes. "I know, Leo. Fear makes people do things they don't mean. She pushed you away because the board people got mad at her," Leo said quietly. "But it wasn't about you. It was about her being afraid of what they would think." For an 8-year-old, he understood far more than anyone had given him credit for. Clinton put an arm around the boy's shoulders. "Your mom loves you. I can see it in her eyes even when she doesn't show it. Sometimes the people who have been hurt the most have the hardest time showing love." Leo leaned into him, exhausted. "Will you wait with me until she comes? I'm not going anywhere." 20 minutes later, Rosalind's car screeched to a stop at the curb. She was out before the engine died running through the rain, mascara streaking down her face. She dropped to her knees and pulled Leo into her arms, holding him so tightly that he could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, baby. I've been so scared of getting hurt that I forgot to love you the way you deserve." Leo wrapped his arms around her neck. "It's okay, Mom. We can start over." Behind them, Clinton stood in the rain watching the mother and son he had somehow become entangled with. When Rosalind finally looked up and met his eyes, she didn't look away. For the first time, she let him see the tears. The next morning, Rosalind called an emergency board meeting. She stood at the head of the table, her hair still damp from the rain, her eyes still swollen from crying. She looked nothing like the icy CEO they were accustomed to. She looked human. "I understand your concerns about the photographs," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I understand that optics matter in this industry, but I need to make something very clear." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I am a mother first and a CEO second. I spent years forgetting that, and it almost cost me my son. I will not make that mistake again." The chairman leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "And what does that mean for this company?" "It means I will continue to run Harrington Dynamics with the same competence and vision that tripled our market value in 3 years. But it also means that I will no longer sacrifice my humanity for your comfort." No one spoke. "If the board finds that unacceptable," Rosalind continued, "then I suggest you begin searching for my replacement. But I doubt you'll find anyone willing to work as hard as I do or as capable of leading this company into the future." She picked up her bag and walked out, leaving stunned silence in her wake. That evening, she drove to Clinton's apartment. The building was modest, peeling paint, narrow hallways, the faint smell of cooking from a dozen different homes. It was nothing like her sterile penthouse. It felt like a place where people actually lived. Clinton answered the door with Bridget at his side, looking healthier than she had in days. "I owe you an apology," Rosalind said, her voice quiet. "I let my fear control me. I pushed you away because I was terrified of what it might mean to let someone in." Clinton studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, that same warm, genuine smile from the night they met. "Fear is a hard thing to outrun," he said, "but you don't have to do it alone." Behind them, Leo and Bridget were already talking, their heads bent over Leo's sketchbook. Bridget pointed at a drawing and giggled. Leo's face lit up. Rosalind watched her son smile, really smile the way he used to before she forgot how to pay attention and felt something shift in her chest. Maybe it wasn't too late to thaw. 3 months later, everything had changed. Rosalind still ran Harrington Dynamics, but she left the office by 6 every evening. The board had grumbled at first, but quarterly profits silenced their complaints. It turned out that a happy CEO was just as effective as a miserable one, maybe more so. Clinton had found steady work as a maintenance supervisor for a large apartment complex. The job came with health insurance that covered Bridget's treatments, and for the first time in years he stopped lying awake at night worrying about medical bills. But the biggest change was the one no one could measure. On a warm Saturday evening, the 4 of them gathered around Clinton's small kitchen table. The apartment was cramped. The chairs mismatched the plates chipped at the edges. But the table was covered with food that Clinton had spent all afternoon preparing, and the room was filled with laughter. Leo sat beside Bridget, showing her his latest drawing, a family standing together in front of a house with a big tree in the yard. "That's us," he explained proudly. "Me, you, my mom, and your dad." Bridget studied the picture with serious eyes. Then she looked up at Rosalind, who was helping Clinton set out dessert. "Miss Rosalind." Her voice was small and hesitant. Rosalind turned surprised by the formality. "Yes, sweetheart." Bridget twisted her napkin in her hands. Would it be okay if I called you something else? Something like—" She stopped, suddenly shy. Rosalind crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. "Like what, honey?" Bridget's cheeks flushed pink. "Like Mom, someday, if that's okay." The words hit Rosalind with the force of a tidal wave. She thought of all the years she had spent protecting herself, building walls, refusing to let anyone close enough to hurt her. And here was this fragile, beautiful child offering her something she had never expected to want again. A family. Rosalind blinked back tears and pulled Bridget into a gentle hug. "I would love that, sweetheart. More than you know." Across the table, Clinton watched the scene with shining eyes. He met Rosalind's gaze over his daughter's head, and the look that passed between them said everything words couldn't. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep on the couch with a movie playing softly in the background, Clinton and Rosalind stood on his tiny balcony, looking out at the city lights. "I never thought I'd feel this way again." Rosalind admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "After Owen, I convinced myself that love was just another word for weakness." Clinton took her hand, his fingers rough and warm against hers. "Love isn't weakness. Love is the only thing that makes any of this." He gestured at the city, at the sky, at everything worth living. Rosalind leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel cold. She felt home. Inside, Leo shifted in his sleep and reached for Bridget's hand. Their small fingers intertwined, 2 broken halves becoming whole. And somewhere in the distance, rain began to fall again. But this time, no one was standing alone in the storm. Sometimes